Bapibo Navitewa Nakawe Jopo Bitong. Hello, everyone. My name is Povi Romero. I'm a Southwest Pueblo woman and an artist. I'm the Native American Arts Fellow for the Vilcek Foundation here in New York. I'm also working with the Metropolitan Museum. Both of those are in conjunction with the Grounded in Clay exhibition, which features exclusively Southwest Pueblo art. I come from an art family, and I'm also on the board for Montclair Art Museum. So I recently relocated to New York, but I grew up in the Southwest Pueblos. I'm from 4 different tribes: Posuagiawinge, Kotye, Kapowinge, Haraokeawinge. Those are my 4 villages that I come from. And growing up in the Southwest is where I learned and got my connection to clay and to earth, since I am an artist as well. I come less from the scientific side, more from the art side. One of the first places I usually start, because I give guided tours for the Vilcek Foundation, is the theme of connection and continuity. That our people come from a legacy thousands of years old of traditional harvesting of clay, hand building, designs iconography, and traditional outdoor pit fire techniques. So I'm going to speak a little bit today about our materiality and our old traditional techniques and how they differ from the modern conception or contemporary clay and ceramics, and the legacy that I came from that I was fortunate to learn. And I learned from my mama and my grandparents, my mom's parents. For these old school techniques, it's not really something that you can go to a classroom and learn. It's really something that a relative or a family member or someone from your village takes the time to teach you and to pass down. So my people's relationship with clay goes on forever. And people the world over have all come to clay as a materiality. You know, there's ceramics the world over. But for me, my special relationship is my heritage. And a lot of people don't know, I did mention it's thousands of years old, but the oldest continuously occupied village occupation comes from Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico, which is one of the 21 Southwest Pueblo tribes. So that has been continuously occupied, never left, never dispersed. The reservation was relegated to a smaller plot of land, but they've always been there. And that's part of the legacy that I come from. So as far as the materiality, which I'm sure lots of you guys are interested in, it differs a lot from commercial clay and the composition, the slips we use, and the pit fire technique. So for us, our clay is locally sourced. We harvest it from riverbeds and mountaintops. And it was so great because Margaret just showed me a beautiful website when we were talking earlier this week. And it shows you the composition of the clay, but then also how far down the deposits go. So it does say it starts about 5 feet down, which I personally knew because I would go out with my family to harvest clay. But now I see that it goes from 5 feet to 40 feet, which is pretty mind blowing for me because I've never had to dig that far for clay. We just kind of scratch the surface and then we find a beautiful clay deposit. Once we find our clay deposits, we harvest them in 5-gallon buckets. And then from there, we soak them in water and physically break down the materiality and crush it with our hands and our feet. And then we run it through a series of screens and sieves. So that's part of our processing of the clay itself. So we run it through colanders to take out, you know, lots of the twigs, the rocks, the big particles, and then we just do a series of smaller grits and screens that we run through. That takes a couple of days to filter everything through all those screens, and we just do old school techniques by hand. So you'll use cloth or window screens or like fine mesh screens. After we process it, we let it sit for a couple days, probably like 2 days. And then we get a bottom sediment of clay, and then we get a top layer of water. So after it's sat for a couple days, we siphon off the water from on the top of it. And then from there, we lay it out on a giant drop cloth to let it start air drying. And this is also an interesting way that it differs from contemporary ceramics and clay because they use commercial grogs. For my people, there's 2 ways that I'm familiar with to temper our clay. One of them is crushed up old pottery sherds, where we break down old pots, physically crush them and mix it in with our wet clay that we're processing. But my family personally uses white volcanic ash, which is pretty abundant in New Mexico. And we do have an active volcano near us. So that's the Valle Caldera. It's no longer active, but it was an active volcano. And when it erupted, it left a whole sheet and a blanket of white volcanic ash across all of the mountaintops. So if you find a sediment of we call it shunya in Tewa, the white volcanic ash, it actually runs across the mountain in a band. So you can find a little deposit and it runs across the whole vein of the mountain. But we use that to temper our clay, and that's old school techniques. So it lends structural stability. It helps us build our walls higher and thinner when we make our pottery. That's how my family does it. And we grind it down, we sift it, and we sift it on top of the clay and then go through and mix it. And for us too, when we mix, one of my favorite parts of the process was that we use our feet. So my mom would sift the shunya on top of the clay, and then I would go through with my little feet and I would mash it up. And then we'd fold it over itself and then go back through again and keep mixing it with our feet. So I was fortunate to learn all these old ancient techniques from my family, which is just such a beautiful thing. And the clay itself is so different because we only do one traditional outdoor pit fire, as opposed to contemporary ceramics, which features two different firings. So that's a big difference for us as well. And even after just our one traditional outdoor pit fire, the piece is already watertight sealed. So since I don't come from the science background, I can't quite speak on the knowledge of why that is. But most contemporary ceramics, you have a bisque firing and the piece is not watertight sealed yet. But then they go through with a glazing process, they do a second firing, and then the piece becomes watertight sealed. But for us, we only do one firing. The clay itself is just so magnificent and so remarkable that it holds its own shape. It's watertight sealed. We can use them for water vessels, for storage vessels, also for cooking vessels. So olden times, you could throw it directly on a fire and cook a beautiful stew inside of it. Contemporary times, my grandma puts it on her gas stove and she still builds a beautiful stew. And to me, it also tastes more beautiful because it has that earthy rainwater flavor imbued into it. So that's part of the process of our clay, but our actual emotional connection coming from the legacy of clay people. My family calls me clay baby, or we call ourselves mud people or mud women. It's just something so magnificent, but to the clay, the earth we see itself, the pottery pieces that we make, we see them as living beings. We refer to them as relatives. So they came from the earth and we came from the earth. They have their own energy and spirit as well as their own lived experience. So that's something from the art side that I feel sometimes can get lost through the scientific side of what's the actual composition of this? Like, what does it mean? But for us, all of it is earth, all of it is clay. So we give an offering before we harvest the earth. And then during the process itself, as we build pieces, we give it the breath of life. Some of your spirit gets imbued in the clay itself, and then it then becomes a living being. So we came from the earth and they came from the earth, but it's just a living relative. It's a legacy. And for the guided tours I give at the Vilcek, I have family members that are part of the curators. And some of the oldest pieces we have on display, some of them are pre-contact before we were colonized and missionized by the Spaniards. And then we have two other pieces that are dated 1050. So almost 1,000 years old. And they are still with us in its entirety. The designs are intact. The knowledge of what these designs are is intact, which is such a fantastic, amazing thing. If anyone is interested, if you're in New York, here in Manhattan, the Vilcek Foundation is on Museum Mile. We're just a few blocks down from the Met. And we also have a connection, it's a companion show. So we have a little over half the exhibition with 61 pieces on display at the Vilcek. And for this symposium, I'm more talking about the materiality of the clay. But if you come to my tour, I talk about the designs and the cultural knowledge that's passed down. And then our companion show at the Met has 55 pieces on display, but a very beautiful, lovely thing. And I'm just so fortunate to be a part of this and to have this connection to the earth and to the land myself. As far as our designs, our decorations, we don't use a commercial glaze. So for our outdoor pit fire, we don't reach temperatures high enough to convert the silica from a glaze into actual glass. So for our outdoor pit fire, we have a pottery piece in the center, and all of our pieces already go in either designed or formed. They have slip or polish or mica, and it goes into the pit fire already fully formed and designed. So you just hope it survives the firing process. But we have the pottery piece in the center, we cover it, And from there, we build a large fire around the vessel. So my grandfather likes to use cedar wood because it's high firing temperature. And degrees wise, it gets over 1200. So it really is a set fired piece. But in terms of commercial ceramics, that's still a low fire temperature. So I did fire a piece one time in a kiln with traditional Pueblo clay. It did become watertight sealed. And I think it was only like an '06 cone. So for those of you that are artists yourselves, you'll understand how low of a temperature that is. But from the degrees of just over 1200, it does become watertight sealed. It becomes utilitarian. It can last for generations. It can last 1,000 years, upwards of 1,000 years. And for our people, we also say that if you want it to last forever, make it out of clay. So we use clay for all of our utilitarian vessels, our ceremonial vessels, also for our homes and our outdoor ovens and our water ladles. So we came from the earth, and so did these vessels. They also came from the earth. The connection is so beautiful. And for the materiality of the slips, it's like, as I mentioned, we don't use glaze, but we use slips, which is a combination of clay and different minerals. So if you ever come see the pieces at my tour that are on display at either location, they have a variety of colors. And all of our clays are locally sourced from riverbeds and mountaintops. So it depends on if you live in a northern village or if you live in a southern village. If you're on the west side or the east side, we have naturally occurring red clay, orange clay, white clay. And then for our slip colors, we also have a variety of different colors. For the white slip, we mix it with a white clay, and then you can also use crushed white seashells to get like a more opaque color. Or sometimes my family also uses that same white volcanic ash. So we can use it to temper and to create slips to paint our designs to get a white color. The reds and the orange come from a combination of different minerals. So you could do like red ochre, that's pretty common, or you could do red iron oxide. We use that a lot in some of our red slips. The black color is personally my favorite, and I think it has the most interesting story. So I don't know how my ancestors figured out these combinations of different minerals and clays to create beautiful colors for our pieces, but we've been passing it down for time immemorial. For the black, one of our common minerals that we use is hematite. So it's a very dark pigmented black color in and of itself. We mix it down with a watered clay. And then from there, I know of two different binders that we can use. So I'm more familiar with my father's way, my father's people. He's from a southern village in Cochiti, and we use a wild spinach plant as a natural binder, which is just crazy and beautiful. So we harvest the wild spinach plant, we dry it out, and we grind it down, mix it in with our slip, and then that binds it to the clay body. The other way that I've heard of, but I'm less familiar with, is using a bee plant. So either way, using inorganic material as a binder for these beautiful slips and clays, all of our materiality is locally sourced and something that's just available to us outside of the village. So you go and harvest it yourself. We have a whole variety of colors and techniques, but it's something so, so fantastic. So we're mainly known for painting our designs in slip, and all of our older pieces would have been painted with yucca paintbrushes, which is a beautiful plant that we have in New Mexico, but it's also traditional ecological knowledge. So we use the yucca plant for braiding, for cordage, for basketry, for paintbrushes. It also played a role in the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, and the roots of the yucca give a beautiful foaming lather soap, which we use for shampoo or for washing our hair. So very multifaceted, and some contemporary artists today still use yucca as paintbrushes. So our connection with the land and with the clay is ever growing, ever evolving, but it's been present our whole lives. So that's something very important to me. And one of our other techniques that we use is stone polishing. So for our technique, you have a bone dry pottery piece, you apply a wet slip, and from there you get a smooth river stone, or you can also use leather or cloth, but I'm more familiar with stone polishing, and you physically pass it back and forth 50 to 100 times just to polish that one section. And then you rotate the piece and then repeat the process all over again. And it's a very beautiful effect for the stone polishing. But something I will note is that the slips and the stone polishing don't really add anything structural integrity wise. So just our raw formed clay body, once it's gone through the traditional outdoor pit fire, is already watertight sealed. It's already utilitarian. So it could be water, storage, cooking, ladles, homes. So a whole variety of stuff, but all of our beautiful designs that the Southwest tribes are known for is just for the sake of having beautiful things around you and to have beauty in your life and in your home. And we do keep intergenerational art. So you would want a piece of your great grandma's or your grandparents or your aunt or your uncle. And in the Grounded in Clay exhibition that I work for, over at the Met, I have a painting of my father. At the Vilcek, I have a piece of my grandparents that was made in tandem. My grandfather built it and my grandmother painted it with our traditional slips. And it was fired in the pit outside my grandparents' house. And my grandfather really is the pit master. And today, all three of our generations of my grandparents, my mother, and myself fire in the same pit behind my grandparents' house. So it's one of my maternal homes that I grew up in back in Pewaukee Pueblo. But it's a very beautiful thing, and I'm blessed to continue to learn from them. And over at the Met for our companion show, on my dad's side, I have a piece of my great grandmother's. And on my mom's side, I have a piece of my great great grandmother. And just to speak more on the connection there, my grandfather was raised by his grandmother. His grandparents were like his parents. So my mother got to meet them when she was a little baby. They helped raise her and take care of her as well. And at the time, my great great grandmother was going blind when she would take care of my mom. So that was one of her first pottery teachers, which is such a beautiful thing. But she told my mom to see with her hands. So she would have my mom close her eyes and they would roll coils together and they would feel the texture, the thickness, how wet the clay is. Is it too dry? And from there, they would build pieces and then they would close their eyes and go around the rim of the pottery and pinch it. And she'd be like, is it thick here or is it thin? Is it an even thickness all the way around? So it really is something that is connected to my entire family for this beautiful show. And I'm so honored to get to watch over these relatives. We all came from New Mexico, the pieces themselves, which are my relatives, and me, also from New Mexico in the village. Now that they're here in New York, I get to watch over them and observe them as they observe me. And one of our last techniques that we use is mica. So you can still buy commercial mica like in bags and mix it and make your own micaceous clay. But for us, we harvest our mica mineral from the mountaintops. And we have beautiful deposits, and it looks like a winter wonderland of just sparkles and glitter and shimmer. And when the sun hits it, it just kills you. It's so gorgeous. So we harvest the mineral, the mica. In Tewa, we call it tinini because of the pretty sparkles. We call it tinini. And we grind it down into a powder, mix it in with our own clay. And then during our traditional outdoor pit fire, it binds with the clay, does not burn off. And then post firing is revealed that glittery, shimmery effect. So, such an amazing, beautiful thing. And it really is something that I'm just fortunate to have in my life and in my lineage. And I am not yet a mother, but if I would hope to one day have children, I would hope to pass that down to them and take them to the reservation and teach them how to harvest clay and how to give an offering and to respect the earth. Because we are, in our view, our mentality, we are wounding the earth. We're taking from her. We're creating a scar when we harvest this clay. But then you cover that scar up with a blessing. You give an offering and you give a prayer because the earth provides everything that we need. The clay is life. The clay is us. We are mud people. So from there, I would hope to pass that down. Oh, poster fell. I would hope to pass that down to my children and teach them to harvest and to respect and to honor the clay, not just as something that we take for granted, but really that we are gifted with the presence. We are gifted with the knowledge of how to do this and then how to conduct outdoor pit fire. And maybe my children could meet my grandparents and they could meet their great grandparents. Just a beautiful blessing to have this life and to be here in New York and to be able to share my knowledge and experiences with other people, especially with the world at large, which may not be familiar with Southwest Pueblo tribes, or even though we just had, Native American Indigenous Peoples Month, some people still have a misconceptions of like the vanishing Indian or that it's gone or that we are no longer here. But of one of my 21 Southwest Pueblo tribes in total, I'm from 4, we have the continuous longest occupation. in the US, in America. We are still here. We are very much present, and we need to pass down this knowledge. So, from there, thank you guys all for listening and for coming to my talk. And I will open it up to any questions. I saw a couple people commenting as I was speaking. So, go ahead and ask away any questions, and I will do my best to answer and share my knowledge with you all.